How are you going to celebrate Father's Day?
Work. I'm going to work. I'm going to actually be calling North Korea. I'm going to be calling, I have a call from your friend from France, Emmanuel.
So the problem is the president didn't seem to do either of those. He spent part of Father's Day as well as several hours on Saturday at the Trump National Golf Club in Potomac Falls, Virginia. And the White House has not released a readout of any call with North Korea. Meanwhile, former White House strategist Steve Bannon is standing by his old boss, claiming that President Trump has never lied or misled the American people.
You famously kept the whiteboard of presidential promises to keep track of what he was keeping. That's a promise that he obviously broke. He has not always told the truth.
I don't know that. I mean, what I see is he has. I mean, this is another thing to demonize.
Wait, you say the president's never lied?
Not to my knowledge, no.
He says things that aren't true all the time.
I don't believe that.
Come on.
I think he speaks in a particular vernacular that connects to people in this country.
Okay, so as long as I'm on this set, that's the last time we're going to hear from him, okay? I wanted to get out of the soundbite early because I don't need more lying. I don't need Kellyanne or Steve Bannon to come and tell us more lies. That's not helpful. We're here to tell the truth.
That's political propaganda.
I don't think
that's political propaganda.
Honestly, I'm looking at his face while he talks.
At this point, running interviews with Steve Bannon, you're just giving a platform for political propaganda.
No, it's just as bad.
But here's the problem, Nikki. You said earlier we could this immigration problem with separating children is solvable, and it is imminently solvable. But it starts with dominant moral leadership. You have to have a president who goes to the Congress and says, you fix this, because I'm going to use a bully pulpit every single day to create the outrage to fix this. But as we showed earlier in the show, he just reverses his policies on whims, on Syria, on the Russian investigation, why he fired Comey, just goes on and on and on. You can't, the Republicans can't trust anything that he's going to say or do now or in the future, which is why they can't hold on to a ground. But if he was a dominant moral leader, he would say, do this or I will win, because the bully pulpit is very, very powerful.
Well, Rick, he's been clear, Mika, don't you think, about what his strategy is? The president has actually been quite clear in this instance. He is using children as political pawns to try to get his wall.
The White House said that.
He is not going to get his wall. So the children are going to continue to suffer, are going to continue to be separated from their parents, are going to continue to be kept in metal cages. I'm sorry, people had problems with the terminology cage. I think that the wire that I've seen,
walls
the
and wire, it's a
construction,
cage,
should we call it a dog kennel? That is going to continue as long as this White House is using children as political pawns.
But also using lies and muddling of the truth and undermining the free press and all the things that have been happening every step of the way here to make people really feel confused about what reality is, and therefore leaving them with less power, less authority over themselves, and less understanding as to what direction our country is headed in. So those people cannot be given a platform. We want to have the truth, and we want to understand what is happening. We want to stick to the facts, and we have to worry about what David Ignatius said at the top of the show, the dangers of a country losing its empathy. Read Madeleine Albright's book. It's called, aptly, Fascism, a Warning. And we are clearly way past the warning phase, and that's not hyperbole, that's not rhetoric. This is deep concern about the direction of our country, and we'll say it calmly. That way the stooges on Fox News, and there's some really good people there, but there are a few who are absolute megaphones for this president, and they will take any little overreach, any little shrill comment, and use that as a way to promulgate the president's extremely cruel lies and policies. And we can't let that happen. It's happening in the media as much as it is in this presidency. And
they're the comm shop.
They are.
Fox News is the comm shop for the White House.
It's frightening. Up next, how much does the president really envy the control that Kim Jong-un has over his people? Well, to the smiles of Fox News hosts, he let us know. That's next on Morning Joe.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.